Hey everyone, welcome back. David in History for the Ages. So this is a video I've wanted to make for a while, the Colosseum. I've been there, I've been to a lot of the places in Rome and Italy. It's one of the most amazing pieces of engineering. It's a household name. Everybody knows about the Colosseum, but I'm going to kind of share some things with you that maybe a lot of you don't know about, and I think that's going to be hopefully kind of cool as you watch this video. And do remember, just subscribe, like, leave comments. Maybe there's another question you had about the Coliseum you weren't sure about. Leave it in the comment. And also, you could always hit the notification bell. That way, when I have new videos, they're out. So what's the deal with this thing? Well, let's start with one. Everybody calls it the Colosseum, but that was not its original name. Originally, it was called the Flavian Amphitheater. So a little bit of background here. What had happened, of course, is Rome, the Roman Empire, had started during the time of Augustus. They had this first, dynasty, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, and the last of that dynasty was a man named Nero. Nero was a very eccentric emperor. He was the one that a lot of people have heard of before. He loved the acting and the games and all of these things. But eventually he died, and Rome fell into this kind of civil war. It wasn't as big and long lasting as what you saw when the Republic fell and the empire began, but there was about a year of period of turmoil in which a man named Vespasian finally emerged. When Vespasian became the emperor, his dynasty is known as the Flavian dynasty, hence the Flavian Amphitheater. Also interesting where it was chosen to build this, because it was built right on top of a man-made lake that Nero was constructing. Nero was kind of working on his own kind of pieces of architecture, but Nero's stuff was more kind of self for himself, and Vespasian was more down to earth, wanted to create something more for the people, right? And so he created, of course, this amphitheater, the Flavian Amphitheater, which later on becomes known as the Colosseum. I believe it becomes known as the Colosseum. People use that term more kind of in the Middle Ages. I've read a couple different accounts of how this happened. One is maybe there was a big colossal statue out there of Nero, and so people refer to this colossal statue as Colosseum, and then the name Colosseum stuck with the Colosseum itself. So I've read a couple different accounts of how it started to be called Colosseum, but it didn't really come referred to that more until the Middle Ages. Also, the fact it was built on a man-made lake is really cool, because I'm going to kind of explain in my last slide what they did with the Colosseum that was really neat related to that. It was an amazing feat of engineering. It was built in less than 10 years, and if you think about that, and you look at the modern stadiums we have today, whether it's a football stadium, basketball stadium, whatever, those take like 2, 3 years to build, and we have all our technology, right? They're doing this all with, centuries, millenniums pre-industrial technology. So it's pretty remarkable how quickly and effective they built this, and that it still stands all these years later, right? A couple thousand years later, and here it is still standing. In terms of how it was built and who built it, part of it was, of course, a lot of it was built, as I said, in less than 10 years, because they also had a lot of slaves building it. And the slaves were acquired when the Romans conquered Judea. So this is a story I get into in one of my other lectures about how the Romans moved into Judea and conquered them. Real quick, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but if you can see here, this is something called the Arch of Titus. Titus was the son of Vespasian, who went into Jerusalem, sacked Jerusalem. You can see on the left the image of the arch, and on the right the inside of the arch. You might be able to make it out. This is the sacking of Jerusalem, where they're taking the loot. They took the slaves. They used a lot of the money and the slaves to build the Colosseum. So that was a big part of how they were able to build it so quickly. But I'm not going to get into the whole history of Israel and Judea. I already have a ton of material on that you can watch on my channel as well. So in terms of the Colosseum itself, once it's built, what's the deal with it? So let's go through some pretty cool things about how it functioned and what it was used for. So it could hold about 60,000 people, which is, again, pretty amazing considering the time. It was also organized in a way where it was, I guess a little bit like today, where it was separated for class segregation. And if you think about that, technically today anybody can go to any major arena, and if they pay enough money they could sit where they want, but you got to pay a lot of money to sit in the good seats. So it's kind of back same way back then. It was kind of cool. One of the other cool things they actually had on it is a shaded roof. So that they had this kind of awning, and they were actually able to even move the awning during the day, depending on where the sun was, to keep the place relatively shaded, which I think is pretty cool. And even though it was built initially by Vespasian, Vespasian had died, and it was first used under his son Titus. So the guy spends kind of this whole big project to build it, build it, build it. Then he dies before it's even used. And when it was inaugurated, they had this 100-day period where every day they had these contests in the Gladiator games in the Colosseum. It was bloody. It was brutal. It was estimated that there were about 5,000 gladiator games, 5,000, sorry, animals killed every day. And one of the cool things that they built as well is this bottom part here, and it's called the hypogeum. You can see this term here, but we'll just kind of circle this here over here on the bottom. This was really where a lot of the animals would come out of. They were kind of these trap doors and almost like elevators that would kind of come up, and they would come out from the underground, this hypogeum. And that was not the initial part of the Colosseum. That was built a little bit later. But that really becomes where a lot of the dramatic events of the Colosseum are developing before people pop up and actually start to see the fighting. They had a lot of animals fighting people. They did have, of course, gladiators fighting gladiators, and that was kind of not as often used as everything else, right? But it was the more dramatic part. It was kind of usually they would do it later in the day, in the evenings, apparently, where more of that would be done. Obviously, if you look at the Colosseum today, it's in pretty good shape, but it has some damage to it, and people wonder where does the damage come from. There was apparently a lightning strike and a few earthquakes, but still, considering how old this is, I think it's pretty impressive that it's standing as well it is, considering they do have earthquakes and weather and all of these things going on there. Now, one of the coolest things about the Colosseum, and this is one of my favorite things to share with people, is they actually use the Colosseum not just for gladiator games, not just to see people fighting people, and of course there's always people know the tragedy of it was used for slaughtering Christians as well, and that was part of the horrific periods of the Roman time periods as well, so that's a thing important to remember as well. But also, they actually fought naval battles in the Colosseum. What do I mean? They were able to flood it. Remember in the beginning I told you it was built on a man-made lake? Well, we have a couple primary sources, a man named Suetonius, another guy named Cassius Dio, and in these sources, they talk about how they were able to flood the arena and actually do these kind of mock naval battles, which is kind of cool. And they've done some archaeological work underneath the Colosseum. People have found kind of these pipes that could have brought the water up there. So, I mean, is this like 100% sure? Maybe not 100% sure, but I've personally seen enough sources, enough archaeological evidence that it was probably used. It was probably not the main thing, but it was something that they did. So the Colosseum was pretty cool, pretty good engineering. Of course, we get the movie Gladiator. If you haven't seen that movie, I have a little review on that movie as well. If you've ever seen it, great movie. Not very historically accurate, but great movie. And I have a movie there as well. So hopefully you watch this and you enjoyed this little video on the Colosseum. You learned a bit more. And just feel free if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And that's it. Hope you kind of enjoyed learning a few new things about the Colosseum there. Everyone have a great day.